A separação Trump-Musk, o que é exatamente o Grande e Belo Projeto de Lei? Uma análise profunda da mais recente proposta legislativa do Presidente Trump e suas implicações.
So, the most important thing in politics in America is honoring the promises that you make to the American people. That sacred trust between the voter and the man they elect, in this case, the President of the United States. I, like you, traveled with the President all across the country. Packed arenas, packed airport fields, packed stadiums. And in every one of those campaign rallies, he made a series of very specific promises that helped propel him to a landslide victory. No tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime, no tax you can deduct if you get an American-made car, the interest from your taxes. Building the Golden Dome to provide a missile defense shield for the United States of America. Passing comprehensive border security and immigration enforcement legislation to both seal up the southern border on a permanent basis and get the people here who don't belong back home. Also, fighting radical transgender insanity. Also, unleashing American energy, deregulating our economy so we can have job growth, making the Trump tax cuts permanent. I could go on and on and on. Each and every one of those promises is codified in this legislation. It is literally as though you took a campaign rally speech and turned it into a bill. The reason it is the big, beautiful bill is because it is a campaign speech turned into a piece of legislation, which is why I'm so proud of the House Republicans for passing this bill and honoring our shared promise to the American people.
So now it's headed over to the Senate, and you tick through. We have 3 pages here. Eliminates Medicaid for illegal aliens. Trump saving accounts for kids. Slashes IRS funding. Green New Deal defunded. Energy production unleashed. Tariffs on Chinese-built ships. You go on and on. Who benefits from this?
Well, first and foremost, the working and middle-class people of this country benefit. For one, according to our estimates, you're going to see a $13,000 average increase in take-home pay for the typical family. $13,000 through both the combination of economic growth that this bill will unleash, as well as the historic tax cuts that will be unleashed. Again, you're talking about not only making the Trump tax cuts permanent, but the largest package of working class, middle class tax relief that has ever been proposed. You combine that with unleashing American energy, getting rid of wasteful regulations, and then also, very importantly, getting the illegal aliens out of the country who are driving down wages for working people. This is the most working class bill that has ever been proposed. I've been in what people call the conservative movement for my entire life, since I was a child, since I was in high school. I never dreamed that we could have a bill as conservative, as transformative, as pro-American as this legislation is. This is the most populist pro-American bill. This is the MAGA agenda in legislative form. I could not be prouder of the people, including the 2 men to my left, who worked with our closest allies in Congress to make this bill into a reality.
Well, that's great. And so, Russ Vogt, Director of OMB, I saw you on Will Kane this week, where your sister emailed in to make sure you pronounced your last name right. So, Russ Vogt.
True story.
No, one of the things obviously we talked a lot about last year and into this year was inflation, and record high inflation under Biden, and there's been some efforts early on to address that. How does this piece of legislation address the cost of living for the American people?
Across the board, I just to reiterate one of the points that Stephen made, you have a bill that is so big on promises kept. Any one of the provisions in here would have been the kind of thing that would dominate the entire agenda for an entire year, and we have so many of them in the same bill. It is fundamentally not a budget resolution. This is an agenda setting, agenda and promises keeping bill. From the inflation side, let's look back to what Biden did, right? So Biden dramatically increased spending, scaled it, used COVID. We'd already funded what was necessary to deal with the COVID pandemic, and he dramatically expanded. And at that moment, you saw inflation really start to become an issue. They dramatically increased regulations. They sent energy prices escalating. And so when President Trump is running on the campaign trail, his inflationary efforts are aimed at those three issues, right? Deregulate the economy, get people's prices down, get rid of high energy costs, American energy across the board. This bill furthers that. And then, of course, in the spending driver and dealing with the Biden spending regime and pulling that back. And this has historic levels of mandatory spending reforms in the constituted as a work requirement and other reforms, but things that really drive our spending down. And I think it's one of the reasons, not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons we're back to having the lowest inflation in 4 years. And we're seeing it drive down. We'll be below the Fed level soon. And so this is on a trajectory that is exactly what he ran on and dealing with the Biden excesses.
Stephen, you had a post on Truth, or on X, I suppose. Largest tax cut and reform in history. Interest on car loans fully tax deductible if the car is made in America. Fast tracks new energy projects and provides protections against future regulations. Terminates the Green New Deal. Cuts $1.6 trillion in net mandatory spending. The most pro-American tax bill ever, as you were saying. Jump off of what Russ was talking about as how this addresses inflation and the cost of living for the average American person.
Yes, well, so you just listed some of the examples there, but every economic provision in this bill, in part of this populist agenda that President Trump has led for a decade now, is geared towards making life more affordable and more prosperous for working people. The ability to go to a car dealership, get a car loan, and deduct 100% of that interest cost from your taxes, the kinds of deductions that normally have only been available to rich people, now are available to the middle class, to the working class in this country. The ability to get energy prices down even lower than President Trump has already reduced them by creating a permanent structure for deregulating American energy and keeping it flowing long into the future, that's going to make life more affordable for everyone, not just the cost of driving, but the cost of heating, the cost of air conditioning, the cost of electricity, the cost of everything is going to go down as a result of this legislation. The Trump bonus for families with new children, again, think about who's going to benefit disproportionately from that. It's not going to be rich people. It's going to be middle-class people, working-class people who have children are going to get a Trump savings account for that new child automatically when they're born. And, of course, extending and making permanent the Trump tax cuts from the first administration that also disproportionately benefited the middle and working class. Not to mention, of course, as we've already discussed, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. All geared towards the people who came out in droves to elect President Trump. There's so much to celebrate in this bill. And again, I don't think it's even possible to convey sort of the point that Russ made. If any of these things was done on its own, this would be considered a historic victory for the movement, for the presidency, for the country. In other words, if we had just did a bill that, say, just did no tax on tips, that would be, people would talk about that in 50 years, right? If Ronald Reagan had passed a bill in 1981 saying no tax on tips, there'd be 15 museums out there talking about the time that Ronald Reagan did no tax on tips. There'd be a constant reel on the History Channel about when Ronald Reagan did no tax on tips. That's just one part of this bill. You know, take, of course, something that I've talked a lot about with you and with many others on immigration and border security. This bill fully funds the entire wall across the entire southern border, land and river. So again, you think about promises made, promises kept. Is there a bigger promise than having full, complete, upfront funding that Democrats can never take away? So in other words, it's there, it's upfront, and by the way, it's paid for. Here's another point that isn't discussed very much at all. The immigration provisions in this bill are paid for by charging foreign nationals more money when they want to come to America. So by raising the fees on foreign nationals who are seeking visas and other immigration benefits, we are paying for the wall, for the ICE officers, for the border agents, for the pay raise that President Trump promised the ICE officers and the border agents. So we are literally paying for the defense of the homeland by increasing fees on those in other countries who want to come here. So it's a win-win.
So when you hear Stephen talk about it, obviously, easy sell. So how could anyone vote no? Let's get into the weeds a little bit. CBO. What's the CBO? How does it work? What is the scoring mechanism? And why are people using it as a way to attack the bill?
The Congressional Budget Office scores bills. They have what we believe is an artificial, unrealistic
Real
baseline.
quick, what does it mean to score a bill?
You take a look at what the bill's provisions do, and you take it and you apply it and compare it to current law and current policy, and you say, will this cost more? Will this save more? What should the impact be of the various provisions? Generally with CBO, we have two main issues. We have the first issue is that when they compare it to what is, it is skewed and is artificial. So they make an assumption. They say all current spending, which we're on unaffordable glide paths, right? They say that is extended into eternity. It's called a baseline. When they look at tax law, they don't do that. They assume that if certain things have sunsets, even though those sunsets exist in spending, that those sunsets exist in taxes or revenue rates, that those are going to actually occur. And so when we just merely extend, and we're doing a lot more than just extend, but if at the general level, if we extend tax relief from 2017, they give us a $3.7 trillion cost, of which that's not new policy. That cost is already a part of the baseline. And so it's important when you're scoring something, when you're deciding how much something should cost, it should be as accurate as possible. When you adjust that, this bill actually reduces at least by $1.4 trillion deficits and debt over 10 years, including all of the things that we do in this bill, it reduces. And that is before the economic growth that we believe in this administration we will produce, because that's the second big issue we have historically with CBO, is that they do not believe that your policies will have more than a static approach to anything. We call this dynamic, and it's typically in the tax side. So not only do they not account for the fact if you allow for a 60% tax increase on people because you haven't extended their tax rates, that might actually have a poor negative economic impact, right? They don't assume that. They don't assume the recessions, the economic woes that would come from that. But they also, so that's horrifying, but they also don't then assume that if you have policies like no tax on tips and no tax on overtimes that are encouraging people to stay and work more and have more productivity, that's going to lead to higher levels of economic growth than you would ordinarily assume. And so that really is the big argument right now that we're having with CBO. And unfortunately, it's not just CBO. It is all of the watchdog groups in this town who, by the way, are policy agnostic. So unlike this president and his administration that are trying to do a lot of different things because we have made promises to the American people, the president has made promises to the American people, they are looking at this through one small prism, and they are saying by our artificial baseline, this impacts the deficit. Not only are they wrong, but they are being irresponsible because we are not policy agnostic. The president ran and won a landslide, making certain promises to the American people that need to be kept. And this is a bill, not a budget resolution, mind you. This is not a bill that's, hey, what is our full budget picture? This is a procedural bill that is allowed to get through the Senate and avoid the Senate filibuster, in which you want to get as much of your agenda into it as possible. And as a result, certainly needs to be scored, but it's important that it be accurate.
I want to break down some of this deficit stuff, some of the CBO issues, because I think it's really important. Believe it or not, I actually was I was a staff on the Budget Committee for 2 years. So for 2 years, I had to learn everything there was to know about the Congressional Budget Office and scoring rules and budget rules. So it's going to get a little bit wonky, but these are really important points. So I want to pick up a little bit on what Russ said. So every year, at the end of the fiscal year, September 30th, all government funding expires. It goes down to zero, right? It goes down to zero. So so if you were to do a score over spending over the next 10 years, based on what is known as current law, right? There'd be 1 year left of spending and then 9 years of nothing. So you would have a year of spending out of 10.